Hello, I'm James.
Hi, I'm Jimmy.
Welcome to A Job Done Well.
A podcast about the world of work and how to improve the daily grind.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm well, how are you, James?
I'm very good, thank you very much. What exciting thing are we going to talk to you about today?
Well, today we are on home ground for you.
All right, go on.
We are talking about the power of analysis.
Oh, spreadsheets. We're going to talk about
No,
spreadsheets.
we're not going to talk about spreadsheets.
I could let you know some of my favourite Excel functions.
That will come back to that later. But we have both experienced the power, the transformational power and the impact that analysis can have. So harnessing the data that you've got to be able to improve your business. We've seen it done badly more times than we've seen it done right.
We have.
So we are going to share our insights on how you unlock the power of your data with analysis.
Should be fascinating.
For you.
For a very niche audience. Yeah.
No, because as we'll come back to, James, we are all analysts, and anyone who wants to improve their performance of their team can do so through the data.
Now will be a good time to hit the stop button.
You're meant to be encouraging people to listen through the podcast,
listen to
not
the end.
stop
Listen
at
to
the
the
end.
end.
Stop now. Anyhow, how you been? What have you been up to?
A week of two halves.
Yeah, right, go on.
Very good and very bad.
What was the very good?
The very good was I had a potting shed delivered.
Oh, yes, the legendary potting shed.
It's like something out of Blenheim Palace, mate. It's fantastic. Here I am.
Hell.
56 years I've had to wait for a potting shed. It's one of those things that I never realised I needed it. But if you haven't got a potting shed, you need to buy a potting shed.
Oh, please shoot me if I ever get to wanting a potting shed.
So that was very exciting.
Yeah.
The downside, my daughter, my 16-year-old daughter, is doing her GCSEs at the moment.
God, how's she getting on?
Oh, she's doing all right. She's doing all right.
Good.
But the other day, she did her English literature exam.
Yeah.
After days of angst, cramming quotes and trying to remember things. And I picked her up and she was in floods of tears. So she was reading Anne in Spectacles and she's in floods of tears. I said, "What's wrong, darling?" She said, "Oh, you'll laugh at me." I said, No, I won't laugh.
Because you never laugh at anyone's misfortune, do you, James?
I said, "What's wrong, darling?" And she said, "I did the question, I did it really well, but the question said, tell me about Mr. Burling, and I wrote about Mrs. Burling because I misread it." Oh.
It's a mistake you only make once.
Yeah, that's there you go. That's a lesson. Read the fucking question. But fortunately, she has no desire to carry on into her A-levels doing English literature. It's one of her hot topics to drop, so I think you're right.
Good.
A cheap lesson. So for anybody out there who's not finished their GCSEs, read the fucking question. How about you?
Well, similarly, I mean, you get to a certain age and the monumental things, a lot of them in your life, your kids. Both of my girls started new jobs this week.
Are they both earning money?
Well, no, they are very independent young women. They have been earning money for a long time, fortunately.
Yeah, mine don't do that.
Mine still cost me a fortune, but they do earn money. But no, my eldest started a job as an estate agent on Monday, and my youngest started working in a spa on her work experience, where she hopes to get a job. So very stressful for me this week.
How are they finding the wonderful world of work?
All right. Yeah, they're doing well. They're both enjoying it, and that's the main thing. So fingers crossed.
Good.
They've found something that they enjoy and are good at. So today we are going to talk about analysis and the power of analysis. And I guess from my perspective, this has been one of the things that has helped me throughout my career unlock improvements in performance. Still learning, still practicing it, still trying to get better at it, but it definitely I've seen the power that this has. But it's your special superpower, James.
Yeah, so it says we write show notes, and it says here Jimmy's written JL, deep expertise as an analyst. What that means is I have had it in my job title for over 20 years and continue to convince people to pay me to do it. So I think we'll just move on, if that counts as deep. So let's talk about the power of analysis. A couple of examples of where it's done well and where it's done badly, I think. My favourite example, actually, of where analysis was done really well. 1854, there was a devastating outbreak of cholera across Soho in central London. And, within 3 days, I think it was something like 127 people died. Absolutely horrific. And some of you will have heard, but there's a physician called Dr. John Snow, who...
I thought he was a character in Game of Thrones.
In Inspector Calls, yeah. But he looked at this, and what he started to do was he started to plot out where the deaths were on a map, and
Not using a spreadsheet.
not
right?
using a spreadsheet. Well, I think it was before Excel, and
Just.
and he realised that all the deaths were clustered around a specific water pump.
Right.
And he managed to persuade the local authorities that the water, this was before germ theory was understood, and he managed to persuade the authorities to take the handle off the water pump. And obviously there was some cesspit was leaking into the water pump, and that was what was causing the problem. And of course, once they took the handle off the pump, it all stopped, the problem went away. And I think it's a really good example of analysis on two grounds. One, it was beautifully simply done and presented fantastically, so it was really clear. The other thing that was really quite interesting, though, is people don't necessarily like analysis. Because, of course, after the disease had subsided, what the authorities did was they put the handle back on the pump. Because if they'd left the handle off, it means that they accepted the whole sort of idea of oral fecal transmission of the disease, and that obviously was more than was politically acceptable, so they put the handle back on. But just interesting, a really good example. Another good example of analysis, but not done well, was the Challenger disaster in 1986. So on the 28th of January in Florida, cold day, and Challenger flew up, I think it was about just before midday, lifted up from the launch pad. I think it flew for about a minute or so, and then you will probably remember seeing it on the telly, but hot gases, and the whole thing just exploded in midair, killing everybody on board. And the real tragedy was that there'd been a whole lot of to-ing and fro-ing beforehand about whether or not they should let the shuttle fly that day.
Right.
And hindsight being a wonderful thing, but hindsight, when you look at the charts and the things that the engineers had presented, they'd shown that the problem was the O-rings, which were sealing the fuel in, and they'd also demonstrated on their charts that at low temperatures these rings were failing, and it was a known problem. However, they didn't demonstrate it in a very clear... And so obviously the senior managers, who are effectively politicians in an organisation like that...
And they really want the shuttle to take off, don't they?
Yeah. And the data wasn't presented clearly, and they went ahead, and the rest is history. So just a really tragic story, but demonstrates how important it is to do analysis and do it clearly.
And those are great stories to highlight it, but real life and death stuff. But I guess the things that we've experienced probably are a little bit, less life and death, but they do.
Well, as close as life and death as you can get in a call centre, mate.
Yeah, perhaps. But I guess a couple of examples that I've got where analysis really helped improve and drive performance. The sales example that I gave before was a really good one, and this is where the couple of analysts that I was working with at the time, Stuart and Andy, they did some analysis that showed that actually the best way of improving sales performance overall was to give your easiest sales opportunities to your best salespeople and your hardest ones to your worst salespeople. And I guess overall, that gave you a performance uplift. Now,
counterintuitive, because you think you give the hardest ones to your best salespeople.
But the easier ones, the best people could get a much better uplift than the people who weren't so good. And no one could make much difference on the tougher ones. Now, all right, it wasn't great for the people who were being unsuccessful. The point it being, it was counterintuitive, and it made me think differently about how we set up the sales operation. They explained it in a very clear and compelling way that helped me be able to understand it. And, at the end of the day, it really did make a difference to our overall performance. So I think that's a good example of just everyday use of data where, you listen to analysts and they can tell you how you can improve performance. But one of the things that we did really, really effectively in one organisation I worked at was we became very good at telling our story about our performance. And that was us looking at what was important, but being really clear about what was important. So before we would tell them everything that we were doing, whereas actually we refined the story to this is what's important, this is how we're doing, and presented it in a very clear and compelling way. And whilst that didn't change the performance per se. What it did do is it changed our relationship with our stakeholders, because they could understand and appreciate what we were doing much more than they did before, where we presented loads of charts and loads of data, but they were always a bit suspicious about, well, what's that really mean? What are you doing? What are you trying to hide? All that sort of stuff. So that's just using data to tell your story.
Well, and there you've got a double-edged sword, haven't you? Because on the one hand, you've got data and analysis to understand what is going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the other hand, you've got data and analysis to tell a good story, and those two are not necessarily the same thing at all.
No, and I think you've got to be careful there, because you can get caught in just the desire to tell a good story.
Yeah.
That's not exactly what we're talking about. What about you, James? You've got, an endless plethora of stories about how, analysis has really helped improve performance.
Well, it's interesting. For me, I think the analysis has to be good. That's just a qualifying factor. What's really interesting is the way the analysis is taken on board by the people within the organisation. Well, I worked for a while for one organisation, and there were two departments. Won't be too specific, just to protect the guilty, but there were two departments, one handed over to the next. And a guy who worked for me, let's call him Dave, did a super piece of analysis looking at variation in performance. And he went to the team manager in the first department, and he said, "Here, look at this."
Yeah.
And the team manager thought, "Wow, fantastic." And he went away, and he must have saved the organisation somewhere between £5 and £10 million by acting on the analysis. And then what Dave did was he moved over to the next department along in the chain and showed them exactly the same piece of analysis, just recut for that department, and said, "Here, look at this. By the way, they just saved £10 million next door." And for the next 3 years, he got absolutely stonewalled, and people were just hell-bent on proving that there wasn't an opportunity. Whereas what they could have done was just even tried it to prove the point. And it's just fascinating that people don't necessarily like the analysis. It's much more to do with what it means for them and how competent it makes them look. So for me, that I think is the key point.
And I think for me, working with analysts, I always found that you've got to win the battle twice, haven't you? You've got to win the battle in the sense of finding the insights, crunching the data, building your story. So you've got to figure out the problem and figure out the opportunity. And then the second bit is you've got to convince people of it. And to be honest, the second bit can be the tougher bit. In your example, it certainly was.
There are quite a lot of people who don't want convincing.
So I guess when we look at it, we'll look at three different angles. As you rightly said, James, you've had analyst in your title forever, but we're also going to look at frontline managers, people who are managing teams. So how do you manage them? How do you improve them? How do you look at the process, your functions, performance? And essentially you have to use data to be able to improve performance. So how does analysis help the frontline manager? And then the third bit is the exec board member. They're responsible for managing, overseeing and improving a business performance, but they have to use analysis as well to do that. The show you're listening to right now brings you insights to help you improve performance and enjoyment of work.
It takes a long time to produce, but we think it's well worth it. It's all in the name of helping you getting the job done well.
All we ask in return is that you share the link to this show with someone that you think would benefit from it. And if you haven't already, click on follow wherever you're listening to this podcast right now. Anyway, let's get back to the show. Okay. Let's go into each of those in a bit more detail, share some of the hints and tips we've got. James, you want to start with the analyst?
So I think the first one, and this will make people smile who've worked for me, is you just need to get really cute on what the problem is you're trying to solve.
Everyone who's worked with you rolls their eyes at that, but in fairness, does work. You need to have that focus. I remember giving some analysts all our data and just saying to them, tell me some interesting stuff from it. Funny enough, they came back with fuck all because I hadn't given them a clear problem to solve.
Just an analytical fishing trip's a total waste of time. The second thing I think you should do is get very clear about the tools and techniques you're using. So I used to have a boss and he used to say to me, the problem with you bloody analysts is you always think in Excel. Yeah.
And relate to that.
Right. But the point is, if you only look at Excel, you start to think every problem is an Excel problem. So if you are an analyst, go and understand what the different problem-solving methods are. Do you know what is data science? How can that help you? What is Six Sigma? How can that help you? What is? But all of these things bring a different flavour to the analysis you're doing. So really, as they say, sharpen the saw and pick your tool, but find out what those opportunities are for you. The next one, my pet peeve, or the pet peeve of people who used to work for me, they used to call me the director of colouring in. I used to get terribly upset with people's charts and data. But if you present people with something that looks like somebody's just vomited on a PowerPoint slide, how on earth are you going to expect them to understand what you are talking about? Yeah? So if you can't present the information in a nice, clear, compelling story, don't bother presenting it because people won't know what you're talking about. And some of this is really simple, right? So make sure that your decimal points line up. Yeah? Put commas between the thousands. If something's bad on a chart, make it red. If it's good on a chart, make it green. You don't want people thinking what the chart's telling them. You want them to think about what the implication is of what it's telling them.
Right. Yeah.
And then the final thing really is just understand the reaction that people will have to the analysis. Yeah.
Yeah.
You might be pointing out that somebody's a world-class tit. It's not going to help you.
People's egos get in the way, and I've had analysts present things in ways that are very, very blunt. And they just, they're almost like lecturing you, make you feel like an idiot. And equally, ones who present it in a way that help you absorb it, and therefore you're more likely to react and act on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, the first one, you're just going to be defensive. Tell them what done.
And then a couple of very quick bonus points. If you're running a team of analysts, I know that sounds obvious, but just could you make sure that they add up? Because I have had people work for me who, we all have different skills, but an analyst needs to be able to add up.
Yeah, and so, you're probably in the wrong role if you can't. I was once given a load of CVs for analysts by our HR team, and they pointed out their two favourite ones, and the only problem, they failed the numeracy test. What favourites then?
Yeah, pointless. And then the final thought is you can wait forever for the perfect data.
If
it's called analytical masturbation, you can go on and on and on and on. The trick is to look at what the data is telling you, draw up a hypothesis, get out of your chair, go and have a look, run a test, see what happens. I used to work with a guy, he lived in the deep south of England. We had a problem in one of the operations up in Yorkshire. He never once went and saw, and you just think, well, how on earth are you going to do your job properly if you don't test things out and go and look? So there you go. That's my golden wisdom on analysts.
Very helpful, James. However, it isn't just analysts who have to do analysis. Actually, as we touched on, first line managers who manage teams, they have to do it.
Although I have seen some and they shouldn't be allowed to have a spreadsheet license.
I know. It's very true. But, they do need to understand and manage, improve the performance of the team, I guess, or it might be a unit or an individual within their teams. They have to do performance reviews, one-to-ones, huddles, business reviews, sometimes presenting their data to their boss. And I get what you're saying, James, but it is often a very rarely taught skill. So, for first-line managers, that's not a core part of their role.
I get it, right? And it is a rarely taught skill. And I would preach two things. There are only two charts which are really important. One is a trend line. So what is your performance over time? Can you draw that out? And can you explain that? And the other one, and I'll say this and people won't know what I'm talking about, is a Pareto chart. It's one of those charts where things are stacked from most important to least important. And if you've got those two things, you've got 80% of it. So I think I'm with you. All frontline managers should be taught how to use those things.
I think so. And another couple other hints for them, I think. Again, a little bit like you said with analysts, but be clear on what the purpose is of your team.
Yeah.
What is it you're trying to achieve for, when you're trying to analyze performance or understand performance, what have you got that's available that shows how you're performing against that overall purpose? You don't need to measure everything that your team are doing. Just what are the critical few things that really help in terms of the overall purpose of a team, an individual, a unit, whatever. You do need to have some of the basic skills, and it is worth taking the time to develop those, whether that's Excel, whatever their MI system, you have numerical skills. Another one, just to add to the list, James,
Yeah.
that I've found always unlocks a load of value, touched on it a little bit earlier, is variation analysis.
Yeah.
So just looking at your team's performance
Do a scatter plot.
and just see where the variation is. Because then, if you find who your best performers are, you can learn from those best performers. It doesn't tell you what they're doing, but you can then go and have a look at them, which is important. You know, same as you touched on, just observe. You can see issues, talk to the team. That way you can generate some hypotheses that you can then look at. And the key thing for me is build relationship with the analysts, because then people will help you out. They will help you when you get stuck. So there's some hints and tips for first line managers. But another dimension that we consider is, you know, when you're running an organization, so if you're an member or a board member, they have to oversee the whole performance of a unit, a division, a company. They're responsible for the delivery of the strategy, the overall purpose of the organization. And they often get caught needing to balance telling a good story and really optimizing performance.
Yeah.
Board members, so non-exec members, have an even more challenging job because they have to figure out the balance between having oversight and actually running the company. The thing with all senior managers, they love a dashboard.
Oh, yeah.
Back to your, you know, head of colouring in.
Red is good, is bad, green is good.
Exactly. So I just want lots of information with lots of greens.
I worked for one guy, and he had his monthly performance review dashboards. It was 57 PowerPoint slides, each one of which had 4 charts on. How on earth he was supposed to get to the point is quite beyond me.
Yeah. So look for the critical few that align with your purpose. And also go and look at stuff. Do you engage with the work? Do you actually see the work? Do you look at the data yourself? And avoid confirmation bias. We talked about this. You know, people want to be proven right.
No, absolutely.
I don't want analysis that tells me how I'm optimizing, how I can optimize and improve performance. That's scary. I just want somebody to analyze my data and tell me I'm great. Well, actually, it doesn't help you in terms of performance. Another thing to think about, I heard a great story about blue chips and white chips, right?
But before we get into that, let's just have a little commercial break. We cover a whole host of topics on this podcast,
From purpose to corporate jargon.
but always focused on one thing, getting the job done well.
Easier said than done. So if you've got unhappy customers or employees, bosses or regulators breathing down your neck,
If your backlogs are out of control and your costs are spiralling, and that big IT transformation project that you've been promised just keeps failing to deliver,
we can help. If you need to improve your performance, your team's performance, or your organisation's, get in touch at jimmy@ajobdonewell.com.
or james@jobdonewell.com.
So we have chips and white chips. They're all, each of those are jobs in
Right.
front of us.
Each chip is a job.
Each chip is a task.
Yeah.
Right. Blue chips, they're really important. Really important jobs, really important tasks. White chip, not important.
Right.
So what people do, delegate tasks and work,
Hand out their white chips.
hand out the white chips, because I'm going to do the important stuff
Yeah,
myself.
yeah.
So, you know, if you're working for me, I'll give you all my white chips.
For God's sake, don't trust Lord with a blue chip.
Don't give Laura a blue chip, give him white chips. But when your boss gives you a white chip to you, because your boss has given it to you.
Yeah, all of a sudden
So-
it becomes blue.
So all of a sudden, you get all the organisation running around doing stuff that senior managers have handed down to them, but actually they're probably not that important in terms of the task itself. So you get, I mean, the classic was, wouldn't it be interesting if we just looked at this in the data? Wouldn't it be interesting? You know, no. Does it? Is it part of the critical few helped on really improving performance? Often not. So really, you do need to learn to see the wood from the trees.
It comes back to the point though, doesn't it? What is the problem you're trying to solve?
How do you question around that point? So really being good at questioning is huge, because you're questioning what you're trying to solve. And similarly, build the right relationships with analysts. When you're running a company, you know, you still need to have those good relationships, because that's your point. They need to trust you to be able to tell you how you can get best performance.
Oh, right. And if you always poo-poo what they come and tell you, they'll stop coming and telling you.
They just get into, it's easier for me to tell you.
Yeah, what you want to hear. Yeah. Final thought from me. If anybody's interested in data and numbers, there is a very good book. It's called The Tiger That Isn't. And it's written by a couple of guys who actually do a program on Radio 4 for that. It's very highbrow. But it's full of interesting tips and things of looking at numbers. So, for example, one of the questions they will always tell you to do is ask yourself, is that a big number? By which I mean, if a politician stands up and he starts talking about, we're going to put £10 million into this project, in the overall scheme of things, it's a rounding error, right? When they're talking about £10 billion, different story altogether. Yeah, so there's one of the examples of the things it tells us to do. But very good book, well worth a look at.
So, in summary, what are the key hints and tips around analysis for people?
So for me, keep banging on, but first of all, be really clear what the problem is that you're trying to solve. Because if you're not, you're on a hiding to know.
For me, don't let your ego get in the way of driving improvement.
Yeah. The next thing is, don't rely on the analysis, always test, right? So the analysis should point you in the right direction. Once you've got a hypothesis of what's going on, go and test it. Yeah, you're looking for progress, not perfection.
And remember the importance of relationships. Make friends with the analyst. They can help you.
The final one for me is just no woolly bollocks. If you're going to present something, just be really clear what you're saying. Clear, concise, and to the point.
And finally, just remember, one way or the other, we are all analysts. Even if you don't have any job title, you can still harness the power of data to improve performance. Hopefully you've enjoyed today's episode and it's given you some food for thought. If you need any help with analysis or building your capability or looking at your data, then get in touch with us. Jimmy@ajobdonewell.com
or James@jobdonewell.com.
Thanks everyone.
Cheers now.
Have a good week.